As part of the Albert Medical School's efforts to deliver an educational program that reflects our values of inclusivity and diversity, we offer a number of resources to help faculty think critically about how to integrate issues of race in our curriculum. One resource that you may have seen is the Creating Inclusive Curricula Guide. The written guide is designed to provide practical support for faculty who are undertaking a review of their curricular materials. The guide includes questions for consideration and links to additional resources. This video is designed to accompany the written guide. We hope that the practical suggestions and examples included here will help faculty refine their presentations for medical students and residents. Let's start with the basics. One very simple way to make sure that your slides are as inclusive as possible is to make sure that the images you use include individuals of a variety of racial backgrounds who exhibit a range of skin color. This may seem like an inconsequential edit to make, but in actuality it can be very important. The use of diverse images can help novice clinicians think broadly about diagnoses in actual patients. The use of diverse images can also help your diverse audience feel engaged in the learning process when they see images that reflect themselves, their families, and their communities. You can see in this example, not only was an additional image added, the presenter also altered a description of how a patient's skin may appear to make it more inclusive of a range of skin tones. It can be difficult to find a diversity of images when it comes to specific pathology. A Google search may not turn up exactly what you're looking for. Keep searching, or perhaps consider paying for a subscription to a company that sells high-quality stock images. When we think about the images we use, we should also consider the clip art and graphics we include. We are all apparently very fond of images of cute babies. Cute babies seem to pop up in all kinds of scientific presentations, perhaps as a way of lightening up otherwise dense didactics. Luckily for us, there is no shortage of very cute, very diverse baby photos online. Reviewing your slides for a diversity of images is one step that you can take to create a more inclusive presentation. Now we're going to talk about two other very common ways that race gets mentioned in biomedical presentations. You can review your slides for each of these to see if they appear in your own didactics. The first is race listed as a risk factor for a particular disease. Many times when we mention race, we're actually using it as a substitute for something else, something more specific. And as scientists and physicians, we should strive to be as specific and as accurate as possible. In this particular example, race is listed as a risk factor for stroke. This represents a very common understanding of stroke by clinicians. However, the key here is that an additional explanation is needed to be as accurate as possible. Race in and of itself is not a risk factor for stroke. It is acting as a surrogate for a combination of socioeconomic factors, including income, access to care, and culturally based customs and practices, including diet. You can see that some of these factors are actually already listed on the slide, but behavioral and demographic information are all jumbled together in a way that leads to learner confusion. When we talk about disease being more prevalent in one population versus another, or if we talk about racial categories as risk factors for certain diseases, we need to be specific about why. Minor changes to the slide on stroke may make the information presented more specific and more accurate. Here are a couple of other examples of how presenters have made their slides more specific and accurate in terms of race and risk. You can see on this example, a very brief addition to a bullet point attempts to clarify the non-biological reasons why certain groups are at higher risk for pancreatic cancer, even if there is not complete clarity in the scientific literature. It may be that when we present information using race, we're simply reporting the results of a study that categorized participants by particular racial groups. But again, our job is to be as specific and accurate as possible. If your slide is citing categories utilized in a study where patients self-identified as being part of a particular racial group, you should say exactly that. You may also want to review your slides for disease prevalence broken down by racial categories. This is a common slide found in biomedical presentations, and it can be very useful to highlight health disparities, or as I mentioned before, when one population is at greater potential risk than another. In this example, the prevalence of preterm births is outlined demographically. However, the way the data is presented, a learner might assume that certain racial groups are just biologically more likely to experience preterm birth. This is not the case. Simple changes to slides can clarify what prevalence statistics actually reflect. First, the presenter separated out the non-racial demographic information to prevent a single slide from becoming too busy. On our next slide, she added an explanatory statement about non-biological factors that contribute to the higher rates of preterm birth in particular populations. Other times when we use racial categories, we may in fact be talking about the presence of genetic markers that are more prevalent in one population than another. We use common racial categories as surrogates for geography or genetics. The words and images on this slide send a subtle message that only Africans and African Americans suffer from sickle cell. This message could impact the way in which a novice clinician approaches genetic screening and diagnoses down the line. The revised slide contains the same information, but it gives a more accurate depiction of the geographic, ancestral, and genetic components of the disease. There are a range of possible edits you can make to your slides when considering the way in which we talk about race and medicine. The simplest option, but not always the best one, is to simply take it out. It is worth asking yourself if the information you present about race is important. Does it change treatment or management of care? Are the categories you use so general or nonspecific that they're basically useless? In this example, the prevalence of muscular dystrophy in whites versus blacks is indicated, but there is no explanation provided, on the slide at least, of why that might be so or how this information might change treatment. Is it the case that white patients are simply receiving more medical care for the condition? Without any information about the research behind the statistic, the broad categories of white and black just don't tell us anything. In this case, removing the racially based data would be a reasonable edit to make. However, it is certainly not the goal of this video to encourage faculty to avoid talking about race altogether. The overarching message is, if you include race, be prepared to talk about what it means. Another possible approach is to provide information ahead of time that tells your learners about the data you are about to present and where they come from. In this example, the presenter wanted to make sure that his audience understood his thoughtful approach to sex and gender. You can also define your terms at the very beginning of a presentation so that your learners understand how and why you're using them. In this example, the presenter wanted her learners to know that the categories she will be presenting are based on the studies that she cites, and that she will try to clarify their meaning in terms of diagnosing and treating patients whenever possible. Thank you for your dedication to medical education and to the values of diversity and inclusion. For more information about race and medicine, and for additional support regarding how to revise curricula, please contact the AMS Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs or the Program in Educational Faculty Development.